What happens when a pilot, full of his own importance, orders a quiet black woman to give up her seat on a private jet? He thinks he's managing a minor passenger complaint. He thinks he's dealing with someone who doesn't belong. He smirks, backed by an entitled passenger, and tells her to move to the back, for security reasons. What he doesn't know is that the woman he's trying to humiliate isn't just a passenger. She's Serafina Washington, and she doesn't just have a ticket. She owns the entire airline, and the plane, and his career. The private lounge at Teterboro Airport was a study in sterile opulence. It was less a room and more a concept, designed to insulate its occupants from the reality of travel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a ballet of sleek, multi-million-dollar aircraft, Gulfstreams, Bombardiers, Dassaults. The air smelled of expensive, subtle floral arrangements and freshly brewed, dark roast coffee. In a plush armchair, angled away from the low murmur of the other guests, sat Serafina Washington. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant bun at the nape of her neck. She was dressed in a simple, dark teal tracksuit, a Loro Piana cashmere set that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, but it whispered its expense. It didn't shout. On the floor beside her chair was not a glittering Birkin or a logo-stamped suitcase, but a simple, worn leather backpack. In her hands was a dog-eared paperback copy of a dense, historical non-fiction. She was, in every sense of the word, invisible. And that was precisely the point. 2 weeks ago, SW Holdings, Serafina's monolithic global investment firm, had finalized the acquisition of Ascendia Global Charter, a high-end private airline that had been bleeding money. The financials were a mess, but the real problem, Serafina suspected, was cultural. The reports she'd read hinted at a culture of arrogance, of entitlement, of crews who saw themselves as gatekeepers to the elite rather than facilitators of service. So, Serafina had initiated Project Anonymous. She had booked herself as a simple, one-way passenger on Ascendia's flagship route from New York to Los Angeles on their crown jewel, the Gulfstream G700, tail number N700 Sassuozuzitsirvs, a plane she herself had authorized the purchase of, which the crew had nicknamed the Odyssey. Her goal was simple: to see the rot for herself. Across the lounge, she watched the other passengers for her flight. A man and a woman, both in their late 50s, dripped with the kind of aggressive wealth Serafina had always found exhausting. The woman, Beatrice van der Meer, was speaking into her phone in a voice that carried across the polished marble. "Yes, of course it's confirmed. I confirmed it," Beatrice snapped, her diamond bracelets catching the light as she gesticulated. "I will not be seated on the divan. I specifically requested 2B. My husband, Arthur, will be in 2A. We are closing this deal, and I will not be uncomfortable." Her husband, Arthur, a pale man with a perpetually worried expression, just nodded, patting her arm. "Of course, dear. They know who we are." Serafina discreetly typed a note into a locked file on her phone. "Passenger BVM, high maintenance, status-driven. Check booking notes for special requests versus demands." A moment later, a man in a crisp, dark Navy pilot's uniform strode into the lounge. He was tall, with silvering temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His name tag read, Captain Miles Donovan. He didn't make eye contact with any of the passengers. He walked directly to the service desk, his back ramrod straight, and spoke to the attendant in a low, authoritative tone. He was, Serafina thought, the perfect image of a captain. He radiated confidence and authority. He also, she noted, completely ignored a service worker who tried to offer him a water, brushing past the man as if he were furniture. Another note. Captain Donovan. High presence, low approachability. Observe crew interaction. Finally, a young woman in the sleek grey Ascendia flight attendant uniform entered. She looked nervous, her smile bright but brittle. "Good morning. Passengers for Flight 722 to Los Angeles. I am Chloe, your in-flight attendant. We will be ready to board in just 5 minutes." Beatrice Vandermeer didn't even look up from her phone. "Is to be confirmed, with the extra legroom and the window?" Chloe blinked, her smile faltering. "Yes, ma'am. All seating has been pre-confirmed according to the manifest. We are looking forward to having you." Beatrice sniffed, a sound of profound dissatisfaction. "We'll see." Serafina closed her book, the corner of the page turned down. She stood, stretching her back. The first phase of the audit was over. Now, the real test was about to begin. She slung the simple backpack over one shoulder and deliberately put her phone in her pocket. She needed to be a passenger. Just a passenger. She was the last to walk to the gate, following the resounding click-clack of Beatrice's heels and the silent tread of Captain Donovan, who had returned to lead his passengers to the aircraft like a shepherd guiding a very, very expensive flock. The air on the tarmac was sharp with the smell of jet fuel. The Odyssey was magnificent. Its white fuselage gleamed under the morning sun, a sleek predator designed for speed and silence. Serafina had personally overseen the interior design specifications, opting for sustainable materials, advanced air filtration, and a layout that prioritized quiet work zones. Chloe, the flight attendant, stood at the top of the air stairs, her smile firmly in place. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Vandermeer. Mr. Vandermeer." "Humph," Beatrice replied, sweeping past her and into the cabin. Serafina was next. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Chloe said, her voice genuine. "Thank you, Chloe. It's a beautiful morning for a flight," Serafina replied, giving her a small, warm smile. Chloe seemed momentarily surprised to be addressed by name, her smile becoming real for a split second. "It really is. Your seat, Ms. Washington, is 1A, just to the right here." Serafina nodded and moved into the cabin. The interior was a masterpiece of muted tones, cream, slate, and brushed bronze. The main cabin had 4 plush, individual captain's chairs, 2 facing 2, and a separate compartment in the back with a divan and a small conference area. Her seat, 1A, was one of the single chairs, positioned for privacy, with its own partition, a large window, and the most advanced workstation. It was, arguably, the best seat on the plane. And it was the one her executive assistant had booked for S. Washington on the public-facing charter schedule. She settled in, pulling her paperback from her backpack. She heard the Vandermeers getting settled behind her. "This is unacceptable." Beatrice's voice, though a harsh whisper, cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. Serafina didn't look. She just listened. "Arthur, look at this. This is 2B. It's fine. But that seat," she hissed, "is the premium. That's the one I wanted. Why is she in it?" "Dear, it's just a seat. We're on the plane," Arthur murmured, clearly trying to placate his wife. "It's the principal, Arthur. That's the solo seat. The best one. I am the client here. I am a repeat client. A pause. "She looks like she won a contest. How did she even get through the Teterboro lounge?" Serafina felt a familiar, cold stillness settle over her. This was the part of the audit she had dreaded, and the part she knew was most necessary. Chloe, ever professional, bustled over. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off, Mrs. Vandermeer? We have fresh squeezed orange juice, or perhaps some champagne?" "I want to know," Beatrice said, her voice low and sharp. why that woman is in seat 1A. Chloe's training kicked in. Her face became a polite, neutral mask. "Ma'am, all seating is assigned based on the flight manifest at the time of booking. Ms. Washington is in her assigned seat." "Miss Washington?" Beatrice scoffed. "And who is she? I've never heard of her. We've flown Ascendia a dozen times. We are known clients. This is an insult." I apologize if you're not comfortable, ma'am," Chloe stammered, clearly out of her depth. "The divan in the back is currently empty if you'd prefer to spread out." "The divan?" Beatrice's voice rose to a near shriek. "You want me to sit on the sofa like luggage? I am trying to conduct business." That woman, she pointed, and Serafina, who was steadfastly reading her book, or pretending to, could feel the gesture like a physical poke, is just reading a book. She's in a tracksuit. She clearly doesn't understand the level of this service. "Ma'am, I cannot move another passenger," Chloe said, her voice now trembling slightly. "It's against our policy." "Then get me someone who can," Beatrice snapped. "Get me the pilot, now!" Serafina felt her stomach tighten. She had hoped to observe the service. She had not intended to become the observation. Chloe, pale and shaken, backed away. "Yes, ma'am. I will see if the captain has a moment before his pre-flight checks are complete." Beatrice sat back in her seat with a sound of triumph. "See, Arthur, you just have to be firm. You can't let standards slip. It's bad for everyone." Serafina slowly turned a page. She noted, with a clinical detachment, the A pre-flight check interrupting captain would be a major breach of protocol. A pilot's focus should be on the aircraft, not on a passenger's seating squabble. If Captain Donovan came out of that cockpit for anything other than a safety announcement, it would be the first major red flag. A minute passed. The heavy, soundproofed door to the cockpit clicked open. Serafina braced herself. The audit, she realized, was about to get very, very real. Captain Miles Donovan emerged from the cockpit, not with the hurried look of a man interrupted from complex calculations, but with the slow, deliberate stride of a landowner inspecting his property. His hat was tucked neatly under his arm. His face was a mask of cold authority. He had not, Serafina noted, gone to the service galley to speak with Chloe first. He had come straight into the main cabin, his eyes scanning the passengers. Chloe was hovering near the galley, wringing her hands, her face pale. Beatrice Vandermeer, however, lit up. She unbuckled her seatbelt, another minor protocol violation, and stood up, blocking the aisle. "Captain Donovan, thank goodness," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of collusion and feigned distress. "We have a bit of an uncomfortable situation." Donovan did not smile. He inclined his head. "Mrs. Vandermeer, I was told there was a seating issue." "It's just, well, look," Beatrice said, gesturing not so subtly at Serafina. "We are, well, you know who we are. We've been flying with Ascendia for years, and we are on this flight to close a very important deal. My usual seat, 1A, has been given away to her." Captain Donovan's gaze shifted to Serafina. It was a look Serafina knew well. It was a look that lasted only a fraction of a second, but it contained a novel's worth of assumptions. He saw her dark skin. He saw her simple clothes. He saw her lack of diamonds, her paperback book, her unstyled hair. He processed all of this and cross-referenced it with the environment. A $70 million private jet. The calculation in his eyes was instantaneous. She does not belong here. His gaze was cold, appraising, and deeply, profoundly dismissive. He looked at her as if she were a piece of luggage that had been stowed in the wrong compartment. He turned his full attention back to Beatrice, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "I see. Mrs. Vandermeer, I can assure you, passenger comfort and propriety are our chief concerns. Please return to your seat. I will handle this." "Thank you, Captain," Beatrice beamed, sitting down with a victorious flounce. She gave her husband a sharp, satisfied nod. Donovan took 2 steps, closing the distance to Serafina's seat. He stood over her, his presence designed to intimidate. He was a tall man, and in the confines of the G700's cabin, he seemed to fill all the available space. Serafina slowly looked up from her book, marking her page with her index finger. She kept her expression neutral, her heart rate steady. This was Data. This was the rot. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was deep, resonant, and carried the unshakable weight of command. It was a voice used to instant, unquestioning obedience. "Captain," Serafina replied, her own voice quiet, calm. "There appears to be a discrepancy with your seating assignment," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "Oh?" Serafina asked. "My boarding pass and the manifest Chloe checked seemed to think I'm in 1A. The use of the flight attendant's name seemed to annoy him. Chloe is a junior attendant. She follows the list she is given. I am responsible for the entire aircraft. That includes the manifest, the passengers, and above all, the security and safety of this flight." He was escalating. He was moving this from a customer service complaint to a matter of security. This was a classic power move, and Serafina catalogued it. "I understand," Serafina said, still calm. "I'm happy to show you my confirmation email. S. Washington, seat 1A, booked and paid for." "That won't be necessary," Donovan said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "The reality is, Mrs. Vandermeer," he nodded toward Beatrice, "is one of our most valued long-term clients. She has a standing preference for this particular seat. There has clearly been a booking error in our new system." "A new system?" Serafina asked, her voice tinged with just a hint of curiosity. Was the old one not working? This, she knew, was a needle prick. The new system was the one her team had implemented 2 weeks ago to stop the very kind of preferential, under-the-table treatment that Donovan was now trying to enact. Donovan's eyes narrowed. "That is a matter for management, Mum, not for passengers. The fact is, we have an issue, and I am going to resolve it." He was projecting. He saw her as a passenger, but he was treating her as management because she'd asked a logistical question. His worldview was simple: those who served and those who were served. He had placed her in the former category, and her impertinence was confusing him. "How do you plan on resolving it, Captain?" Serafina asked, closing her book completely and placing it in her lap. He took her full attention as a sign of submission. His tone became paternal, condescending. "It's very simple. I am going to move you. The divan in the aft cabin is quite comfortable. You'll have it all to yourself. You can read your book back there, in total privacy." "The divan," Serafina repeated, her voice flat. "The sofa. It's the standard procedure for overflow, or for staff," he said, the slip of the tongue so fast she almost missed it. "Or for staff. So, you are asking me to give up my confirmed, prepaid seat, the most expensive on the aircraft, to move to the sofa, so that another passenger, who is already comfortably seated, can be more comfortable." "I am not asking you, ma'am," Captain Donovan said. And there it was, the steel beneath the facade. "I am telling you, as the captain of this aircraft, I have final say on all seating and safety, and I am deeming this a security issue." This was the moment, the point of no return. The silence in the cabin was absolute. The low hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade away. Chloe, the flight attendant, stood frozen by the galley, her hand half raised as if to object, but no sound came out. Beatrice Vandermeer was watching with unconcealed, gleeful anticipation. A security issue. Serafina's voice was dangerously quiet. "Captain, please elaborate. How exactly am I a security issue?" Captain Donovan, having committed to this line of attack, now doubled down. He crossed his arms, a classic aggressive posture. "Your booking is an unknown," he said, his voice hard. "You're not a known client with Ascendia. You're not on any of our preferred lists. Mrs. Vandermeer, on the other hand, is. Her presence and her requirements are a known quantity. In this cabin on my aircraft, I eliminate variables. You, ma'am, are a variable." It was the most professionally worded, profoundly prejudiced logic Serafina had ever heard. He had built a fortress of procedure around his own bias. He saw her, a black woman in a tracksuit, as an unknown, an unvetted variable. He saw Beatrice, a white woman in diamonds, as a known quantity. "So to be clear," Serafina said, her eyes locking with his, "I am a variable because I am not a known client, and your solution is to move the variable to the back of the plane." "Precisely," he said, mistaking her clarity for capitulation. "It's for the comfort and safety of all passengers. It standardizes the cabin." "It standardizes the cabin," Serafina repeated. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. "Captain, I'm afraid I must decline." Donovan's face, which had been set in a mask of professional arrogance, now flickered with genuine visible anger. His nostrils flared. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. This is not a request. I am the pilot in command. My word is law on this aircraft, according to FAA regulations. Now please, take your bag and move to the aft cabin." "No," Serafina said. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simple, flat, and immovable. "I will not." A sharp gasp came from Beatrice's seat. "The nerve!" Donovan's face flushed a dull, angry red. "Ma'am," he said, uncrossing his arms and leaning down, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You are now interfering with a flight crew. That is a federal offense. You have two choices. You can walk to the divan, or I can have Teterboro Port Authority security drag you off this aircraft. Which will it be?" This was the ultimate threat. He was threatening to have her arrested, on her own plane. Serafina looked past him, to Chloe, who looked like she was about to cry. She looked at Beatrice, who was practically vibrating with smug victory. Then she looked back at the captain. "So you would delay your flight, inconvenience your valued client, and file a federal incident report, with all the paperwork that entails, all to move a paying passenger from one seat to another. Because you want her to?" "I am doing this for the safety and order of my flight," he shot back, his voice rising. "You are doing this," Serafina said, her voice cutting through his, "because you looked at me and made a judgment. You are doing this because Mrs. Vandermeer asked you to. You are doing this because you are arrogant, and your ego cannot handle the word no from someone you have already deemed a variable." Donovan stared at her, stunned into silence by the sudden, sharp analysis. He had expected a cowering apology or a tearful protest. He had not expected a scalpel. That's insubordination," he sputtered, a weak, pathetic comeback. "It's the truth," Serafina said. She held his gaze. "You have threatened a passenger. You have cited security without a single, verifiable cause other than your own prejudice. You have done this in front of your crew and other passengers. You have put your own ego above your professional duty. And you have done it all on my time." Donovan blinked. Your time?" Serafina reached into her simple backpack. Donovan flinched as if expecting a weapon. Beatrice gasped. "She's reaching for something." Serafina ignored them both. Her hand emerged, not with a phone, not with an ID, but with a simple, laminated badge on a lanyard. It was a standard Ascendia corporate ID, one she hadn't planned on using. Donovan squinted at it. "What is that? A crew pass? Are you a flight attendant? You are way out of uniform." He laughed, a short, barking sound. "That's it then. You're fired. You're done. Now get off my plane." Serafina didn't look at the badge. She just held it up. "Look closer, Captain." Chloe, from the galley, had a better view. Her eyes went wide. Her hands flew to her mouth. She knew what that ID badge looked like. It wasn't the standard silver of a flight crew. It was the platinum-edged, holographic badge of the executive board. Donovan, seeing Chloe's reaction, finally snatched the badge from Serafina's hand. He read the name. Serafina Washington, Chief Executive Officer, SW Holdings. He read the title below it. Chairwoman of the Board, Ascendia, Global Charter. His face, which had been red with anger, drained of all color. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. The blood left his face so fast he seemed to sway on his feet. Your Holdings, he stammered, his voice suddenly a hoarse, strangled whisper. Serafina. Washington. Beatrice Vandermeer, seeing the entire scene shift, leaned forward. "What? What is it? What does it say?" Serafina gently took the badge back from his limp hand. "It says," she said, her voice now resonating with the cold, clear authority he had only been pretending to have, "that you are standing in my cabin, on my aircraft, threatening to arrest me." She pulled out her phone. "And it says that you, Captain Miles Donovan, are grounded, effective immediately." The immediate ringing silence that followed Serafina's words was heavier and more profound than any shout. Captain Donovan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the laminated badge having seared its image into his brain. He was, for the first time in his adult life, utterly, completely, and irrevocably out of his depth. Beatrice Vandermeer, however, still hadn't processed the shift in power. What is this nonsense? A chairwoman. Don't be ridiculous. She's in a tracksuit. Arthur, tell them this is absurd. Arthur, who had been silent the entire time, was staring at Serafina, his face pale. He was a businessman. He read the financial news, and the name Serafina Washington and SW Holdings had just clicked into place. SW Holdings was not just an investment firm, it was the firm, a behemoth that bought and sold companies like other people bought groceries. "Beatrice, be quiet," Arthur whispered, a new, unfamiliar terror in his voice. "I will not be quiet," Beatrice snapped, but her voice was smaller now, uncertain. Serafina ignored them both. Her attention was focused entirely on Donovan. She had unlocked her phone and was typing a message. "Captain," she said, her voice crisp, "I am going to make a call. I suggest you go to the cockpit, take off your headset, and wait for further instructions. Do not touch any controls. Do not speak to air traffic control. You are relieved of command." You can't," he stammered. But the fight was gone. He was a balloon that had been pricked. "I am the pilot in command." "You were the pilot in command," Serafina corrected him, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "You are now an employee, pending a full investigation, and your first act as such will be to follow my direct order. Go to the cockpit. Now." Donovan looked at the cockpit door. He looked at Serafina, and he turned, his ramrod straight back, suddenly looking brittle, and walked the 3 steps to the cockpit, closing the door behind him with a soft, defeated click. The cabin was left with the 4 remaining occupants. Serafina immediately hit a number on her phone speed dial. It rang once. "Robert," she said, her voice all business. "It's Serafina. I'm on the Odyssey at Teterboro." A pause. "No, the audit isn't going well. We have an active situation. I've just had to ground Captain Donovan." Another pause. Serafina's eyes were closed, as if she were gathering strength. The charge? Conduct unbecoming, extreme prejudice, and, let's see, threatening the owner of the company with federal arrest. The voice on the other end, Robert Alistair, her head of operations, was audible even from the phone, a sputtered, shocked sound. "Yes, exactly," Serafina continued. "I need a replacement crew, Robert. Full cockpit and cabin. I want the Odyssey's backup team scrambled. They should be at Teterboro within 30 minutes, yes? Good. Have them meet me at the aircraft. And Donovan's co-pilot? I want him fully debriefed. He's been silent this entire time, which I'm not sure is a good or a bad thing." She listened. "Yes. Donovan is in the cockpit. Have Teterboro ground security meet him. He is to be escorted from the premises. Not in handcuffs, Robert. Let's maintain some dignity. But he is to surrender his Ascendia credentials, his airport pass, and his company-issued tablet. His access to all our systems is to be revoked. As of 5 minutes ago. Understood? Thank you." She hung up. She then looked, for the first time, at Chloe. The young flight attendant was standing by the galley, tears streaming silently down her face. She was terrified she was about to be fired. Serafina's voice softened. "Chloe." The girl flinched. "Yes, Ms. Washington. I am so sorry. I didn't know. He's the captain." "Chloe," Serafina said, "go to the galley. Take a deep breath. Drink a glass of water. You are not in trouble. You followed procedure. When the new crew arrives, you will assist them with the manifest transfer. You handled an impossible situation with as much grace as you could." Chloe nodded, her relief so profound she nearly sagged against the wall. "Thank you, Ms. Washington, thank you." She fled to the galley, which left the Vandermeers. Beatrice was now chalk white. The dots had been connected. The sheer, unmitigated disaster of her actions was dawning on her. Ms. Washington," Beatrice began, her voice a sycophantic, trembling mess. My goodness. What a test. What a brilliant idea. To check on your new company." She laughed, a high, panicked sound. "I must say that pilot, Donovan, his behavior was appalling, absolutely disgraceful. We were just horrified, weren't we, Arthur?" Arthur wisely said nothing. Serafina simply stared at her. She didn't respond. She just let the woman's panicked words hang in the air and die. We were just so concerned," Beatrice tried again, her "we" a desperate attempt to include her husband. We were testing him too, to see if he'd stand up for his real clients." This was, perhaps, the single most pathetic attempt at a recovery Serafina had ever witnessed. "Mrs. Vandermeer," Serafina said, her voice flat. "Please stop talking." Beatrice's mouth snapped shut. "You were not testing anyone," Serafina said. "You were not horrified. You were delighted. You were an active participant. You instigated this. You used your status to try and bully a fellow passenger. And when that didn't work, you sicked an arrogant pilot on her, hoping he'd do your dirty work. You saw a woman who didn't look like you, who didn't dress like you, and you assumed she was less than. You assumed she was a variable." "No, I would never," Beatrice whispered. "You did," Serafina said, And in doing so, you encouraged a man to break protocol, to violate FAA guidelines on crew conduct, and to destroy his own career. All for a seat. A seat, by the way, that you were never entitled to. Serafina's phone buzzed. A text from Robert. Security is en route. New crew is 10 minutes out. She stood up, pulling her small backpack from under the seat. She walked past the shell-shocked Vandermeers to the front of the cabin and opened the plane door, breathing in the fresh, fuel-scented air. She could see 2 black SUVs pulling up to the tarmac. The full revelation was complete. Now, it was time for the consequences. The arrival of the black SUVs was swift and silent. 3 men in dark suits, the Teterboro ground security team, ascended the air stairs. They were followed by a man Serafina recognized, Robert Alastair, her COO, his face grim. Behind him were 3 people in immaculate Ascendia uniforms, a new pilot, a co-pilot, and a senior flight attendant. Serafina met Robert on the stairs. "Robert, thank you for coming." "I wouldn't miss it," he muttered, his eyes furious. He looked past her into the cabin, at the Vandermeers, then nodded toward the cockpit. "He's still in there?" "He is," Serafina said. Robert nodded to the security team leader. "Captain Donovan is to be escorted from the property. He is not a threat. He is just unemployed. Be professional." The lead security agent nodded, and the 3 men entered the plane, walking past the Vandermeers as if they weren't there. They knocked once on the cockpit door. "Captain Donovan, this is ground security. We're here to escort you." The door opened. Miles Donovan emerged, his hat now in his hand. He was stripped of his authority, and the change was startling. He was just a man in a costume. He looked grey and small. He did not look at Serafina. He did not look at anyone. He just fell into step with the security team, who flanked him and walked down the stairs and into the back of one of the waiting SUVs. It was over in less than 30 seconds. A career evaporated. Robert Alastair then stepped fully into the cabin. He looked at Beatrice and Arthur. "Mr. and Mrs. Vandermeer," Robert said, his voice clipped. "I am Robert Alastair, COO of Ascendia. Given the unprecedented disruption, we are cancelling today's flight. We will, of course, be refunding your charter fees." "Cancelling?" Beatrice squeaked, her face aghast. But our deal. We have to be in Los Angeles by 4 p.m. This is... Ms. Washington, please." Serafina, who had been speaking quietly to the new flight crew, turned. Her face was no longer that of an auditor, or even an angry owner. It was the face of Serafina Washington, the CEO. It was a face that decided the fate of multi-billion-dollar mergers. It was cold, analytical, and utterly impartial. "Mrs. Vandermeer," Serafina said, "your travel plans are no longer my concern. But your deal in Los Angeles, that is my concern. I believe you were scheduled to meet with the acquisitions team for the Ascendia Prestige contract?" Beatrice froze. The blood drained from her face now. The contract?" she stammered. "Yes. The 5-year exclusive catering contract for the entire Ascendia global fleet. A contract valued at, I believe, $100 million. Arthur, her husband, finally spoke. His voice was a dry croak. Our meeting was with a Mr. Henderson from your SW Holdings, F&B division." "That's correct," Serafina said. "Mr. Henderson reports to Mr. Alastair, who, as you know, reports to me. Your flight today, on my private flagship, was supposed to be the final, celebratory, soft pitch before you signed the papers in LA. This entire trip, this plane, this flight, was meant to be the pinnacle of the service your company, Vandermeer Catering, was proposing to provide." Beatrice's eyes were wide with a dawning, abject horror. She was realizing this wasn't just a social blunder. This was a financial catastrophe. "You were auditioning," Serafina continued, her voice level, "to provide prestige service to Ascendia's clients. And you have shown me, in no uncertain terms, what you believe prestige service to be. You believe it means fawning over those you perceive to have power, and actively, viciously trying to displace those you purses W. Holdings had finalized the acquisition of Ascendia Global Charter, a high-end private airline that had been bleeding money. The financials were a mess, but the real problem, Serafina suspected, was cultural. The reports she'd read hinted at a culture of arrogance, of entitlement, of crews who saw themselves as gatekeepers to the elite rather than facilitators of service. So, Serafina had initiated Project Anonymous. She had booked herself as a simple, one-way passenger on Ascendia's flagship route from New York to Los Angeles on their crown jewel, the Gulfstream G700, tail number N700SW, a plane she herself had authorized the purchase of, which the crew had nicknamed the Odyssey. Her goal was simple: to see the Rot for herself. Across the lounge, she watched the other passengers for her flight. A man and a woman, both in their late 50s, dripped with the kind of aggressive wealth Serafina had always found exhausting. The woman, Beatrice Vandermeer, was speaking into her phone in a voice that carried across the polished marble. "Yes, of course it's confirmed. I confirmed it," Beatrice snapped, her diamond bracelets catching the light as she gesticulated. "I will not be seated on the divan. I specifically requested 2B. My husband, Arthur, will be in 2A. We are closing this deal, and I will not be uncomfortable." Her husband, Arthur, a pale man with a perpetually worried expression, just nodded, patting her arm. "Of course, dear. They know who we are." Serafina discreetly typed a note into a locked file on her phone. "Passenger BVM. High maintenance. Status-driven. Check booking notes for special requests versus demands." A moment later, a man in a crisp, dark Navy pilot's uniform strode into the lounge. He was tall, with silvering temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His name tag read, Captain Miles Donovan. He didn't make eye contact with any of the passengers. He walked directly to the service desk, his back ramrod straight, and spoke to the attendant in a low, authoritative tone. He was, Serafina thought, the perfect image of a captain. He radiated confidence and authority. He also, she noted, completely ignored a service worker who tried to offer him a water, brushing past the man as if he were furniture. Another note. Captain Donovan. High presence, low approachability. Observe crew interaction. Finally, a young woman in the sleek, grey Ascendia flight attendant uniform entered. She looked nervous, her smile bright but brittle. "Good morning, passengers for Flight 722 to Los Angeles. I am Chloe, your in-flight attendant. We will be ready to board in just 5 minutes." Beatrice Vandermeer didn't even look up from her phone. "Is 2B confirmed, with the extra legroom and the window?" Chloe blinked, her smile faltering. "Yes, ma'am. All seating has been pre-confirmed according to the manifest. We are looking forward to having you." Beatrice sniffed, a sound of profound dissatisfaction. "We'll see." Serafina closed her book, the corner of the page turned down. She stood, stretching her back. The first phase of the audit was over. Now the real test was about to begin. She slung the simple backpack over one shoulder and, deliberately, put her phone in her pocket. She needed to be a passenger. Just a passenger. She was the last to walk to the gate, following the resounding click-clack of Beatrice's heels and the silent tread of Captain Donovan, who had returned to lead his passengers to the aircraft like a shepherd, guiding a very, very expensive flock. The full revelation was the lightning. This was the thunder. Captain Miles Donovan's karma. As Miles Donovan sat in the back of the security SUV, the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. It wasn't just the loss of his job. He was 58 years old. He had built his entire identity around being Captain Donovan. He had been ex-Air Force, a pilot's pilot, with a perfect record. But his perfect record was now indelibly stained. Serafina Washington was not a vindictive woman, but she was a thorough one. The investigation was swift. Robert Alastair found what Serafina had suspected, a long history of minor complaints, all handled by Donovan. Complaints from female flight attendants about his abrasive tone, complaints from ground crew about his arrogance. But he flew the expensive planes, and he always got the important clients, like the Vandermeers, where they wanted to go, so his behavior had been tolerated. No longer. He was fired for cause. His conduct unbecoming was the official reason. But the real karma, the hard karma, was the note that went into his permanent FAA record. Serafina, in her official capacity as the owner of the charter service, filed a report stating that Captain Donovan had, without cause or evidence, and acting on personal prejudice, falsely declared a paying passenger a security threat in an attempt to unlawfully remove them from an aircraft. That note was a death sentence for his career. No other high-end charter would touch him. He couldn't fly for a major airline. His pride, his perfect record, and his profound arrogance had cost him the one thing he loved, the sky. He lost his six-figure salary, his flight pension, and worst of all, his status. The last Robert Alastair heard, Miles Donovan was working as a part-time simulator instructor in a strip mall in Central Florida, teaching teenagers how to fly. The granite-jawed god of the skies was grounded forever. Beatrice Vandermeer's karma. Beatrice's karma was faster and, arguably, more brutal. As she and Arthur stood on the Teterboro tarmac, their luggage being unceremoniously pulled from the Odyssey's hold, the reality of Serafina's words hit them. "The deal is dead, Robert," Serafina had said, loud enough for them to hear. "Find me their nearest competitor. I want a meeting with them as soon as I land in LA. Tell them the Ascendia Prestige contract is back on the table." Vandermeer Catering, as Arthur knew all too well, was leveraged to the hilt. They had taken out massive loans to scale up their operations, all in anticipation of landing the Ascendia contract. It was their whale, the deal that would make them. Beatrice's desperate attempt to secure a slightly better seat had not just cost them a $100 million contract, it had just bankrupted their company. As they were escorted back to the terminal, not the private lounge, but the main terminal, to arrange their own commercial flight back, Beatrice's phone began to ring. It was the bank, then her operations manager. The news of the contract's immediate and final termination had been instantaneous. Within 6 months, Vandermeer Catering was in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Their assets were liquidated. Their reputation in the insular world of high-end catering was destroyed. Beatrice, who had defined her entire life by her status, had to sell her diamonds, then her apartment, then her dignity. She had tried to bully a woman in a tracksuit, and in doing so had engineered her own spectacular fall from grace. She and Arthur were last seen flying coach, and, as the universe would have it, seated near the lavatory. That was the hard karma. It wasn't mystical. It was logistical. It was financial. It was the simple, cold, brutal consequence of treating another human being as a variable. Back on the Odyssey, the atmosphere had undergone a chemical change. The oppressive, ego-driven tension that had radiated from the cockpit had evaporated. In its place was the low, efficient hum of true, quiet competence. Captain Anne-Marie Roche, the replacement pilot, had a face of calm professionalism. She and her co-pilot had completed their pre-flight checks in a stunningly fast 10 minutes, their voices on the intercom a model of just the facts clarity. The new senior flight attendant, Maria, moved through the cabin with a quiet, reassuring grace, her movements economical and her smile genuine. She was the antithesis of the drama that had just unfolded. Serafina, however, had one final piece of business before they departed. She stood and walked to the galley. Chloe was there, ostensibly helping Maria, but in reality she was just standing, her hands trembling, her face pale with the aftershock of the morning's events. She was still an employee in a deeply compromised situation, a witness to a career-ending confrontation. When she saw Serafina approach, she flinched, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "Ms. Washington," she whispered, her hands twisting in the hem of her uniform jacket. I can pack my things. I understand if I'm being let go for all this." "Quite the opposite, Chloe," Serafina said, her voice softer than it had been all morning. She knew this was the most important part of the entire audit. Identifying the rot was easy. Cultivating the good was the real work. "You were in an impossible position today," Serafina continued. "A true no-win scenario. You were caught between a captain with a God complex and a passenger with an entitlement complex. You were terrified. I could see it. Anyone would be. But you didn't break." Serafina held her gaze, forcing the young woman to absorb the praise. "You didn't cry in front of the passengers. You didn't fawn over Mrs. Vandermeer. And you didn't, and this is the most important part, throw me under the bus to appease her. You stood your ground, you cited your training, and you tried to de-escalate. You were a professional, even when your captain was acting like a petulant child. I was just doing my job, Ma'am," Chloe stammered, tears welling up again. "No, you were doing more," Serafina said. "I bought this airline, Chloe, because I knew it was rotten. Not the planes, but the culture. The culture that told Captain Donovan he was a king, and that a passenger's value was measured in diamonds. That culture ends today. And I need people to help me build the new one." She saw the confusion in Chloe's eyes and pressed on. "Donovan was right about one thing. The new system is having problems. The old guard is fighting it. So I am creating a new role, effective immediately. Director of In-Flight Service and Culture. It will be based in our New York headquarters. The job is simple. Rewrite the entire service manual from top to bottom. Retrain every single flight attendant. And your first lesson will be this. Respect is the baseline, not a reward for perceived status. I need someone who understands that in their bones, someone who has lived it." Chloe was just staring, her mouth slightly open, as if Serafina were speaking a foreign language. "Ma'am, I don't understand. I'm a junior attendant. I've only been flying for 8 months. I don't have a business degree." "You have something far more valuable," Serafina corrected her, her voice firm. "You have first-hand experience with the rot, and you have the moral compass to fix it. You have integrity, Chloe. I can teach you how to read a spreadsheet and run a department. I cannot teach character. You already have that." Serafina held out her hand. "The job is yours if you want it. Your salary triples, starting with your next pay cycle. You'll report directly to Robert Alastair. Is that something you'd be interested in?" Chloe looked at Serafina's outstretched hand as if it were a life raft. She looked at Maria, the new attendant, who was smiling, tears in her own eyes at having witnessed this. And then, for the second time that day, Chloe burst into tears. But these were not the silent, terrified tears from before. This was a ragged, cathartic sob of pure, unadulterated shock and relief. She couldn't even speak. She just nodded, her whole body shaking, and took Serafina's hand in both of hers. "Good," Serafina said, giving her hand a firm, congratulatory shake. "Maria will escort you off the plane. Go home, get some rest. Robert's office will call you on Monday with the contracts and your new office details. And Chloe, welcome to the executive team." Chloe, in a complete daze, was guided off the plane by Maria, her life irrevocably and wonderfully changed. Serafina returned to her seat. Seat 1A, her rightful seat. A moment later, Maria returned. All business. "Ms. Washington, the cabin is secure. Captain Roche has us on a priority departure." "Thank you, Maria," Serafina said, and she finally buckled her seatbelt. The taxi to the runway was smooth. Captain Roche's voice came over the intercom, calm, clear, and blissfully brief. "Cabin secure for takeoff. Flight time to Los Angeles will be 5 hours and 10 minutes. Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington." The Gulfstream G700's engines spooled up. The power was immense, a velvet-gloved fist pushing them back into the plush, cream-colored seats. The Odyssey hurtled down the runway, and then, with a grace that defied its size, it ascended. Serafina looked out the window. Far below, she could see the Teterboro terminal. She saw the black SUV that had taken Donovan away, now just a speck leaving the airport. She saw the other, smaller jet where the Vandermeers were supposed to be, still sitting cold and dark at its gate, cancelled and going nowhere. The plane broke through the low-lying grey clouds and burst into a sky of brilliant, blinding blue. The drama was below them. The rot was on the ground. Serafina unclipped her seatbelt. The Project Anonymous audit had been a spectacular, chaotic, and ultimately necessary success. It had cost one man his career and one company its future. But it had also revealed a diamond in the rough. It was, she thought, a very fair trade. She reached into her simple, worn leather backpack. She pulled out her dog-eared paperback book, turning to the page she had marked with her finger, what felt like a lifetime ago. And finally, in the quiet, peaceful cabin of her ascending aircraft, Serafina Washington began to read. And that's the story of Serafina Washington and the $100 million seating arrangement. It's a powerful reminder that true status isn't about what you wear, the diamonds on your wrist, or the seat you demand. True status is about character. It's about how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. Captain Donovan and Beatrice Vandermeer made a fatal assumption. They assumed the person they were trying to crush was powerless. But the hard karma that hit them wasn't magic. It was the direct, real-world consequence of their own arrogance and prejudice. Serafina didn't have to curse them. She just had to let their own actions bounce back and destroy them. And in the end, true leadership, like Serafina's, wasn't about punishing the wicked, but about rewarding the good, like Chloe. What did you think of Captain Donovan's security excuse? Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly ruin their own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories where the receipts always get checked. Thanks for watching.